Okay, hey, welcome to a Tuesday night live from the Backyard Professor. I normally don't do the weekday lives, but this is a very special reason for doing this. If you wouldn't mind, allow me to, hey, Doug Vincent, Tim Rathbone, good to see you, my brother. Hey, Barry Richens, good to see you. And Moksha Raver, great to see you, man. If you guys would, please do, subscribe and hit the notification button and hit the like button. I want this series to be well watched because this really was a watershed moment in the history of Mormon apologetics, where one of the cream of the crop of critic and one of the cream of the crop of Mormon apologist butted heads, and they really tried to present both of their sides thoroughly. It was probably one of the better, if not the best, I'll call it discussion. They said they were debating. I don't know if they were debating so much as just trying to discuss, but it was seriously significant for a number of reasons. The first and foremost reason, and this is me personally, is I had no idea of the actual state of Book of Mormon apologetics, and I had come out of apologetics, as y'all know by now, and so I still thought, well, you know, there might be stuff that Jenkins misses and Bill can really put in there and show Jenkins that his criticism is wrong, and Hamblin failed to provide even one idea, one actual piece of evidence, I should say, in favor of the Book of Mormon historicity. And Jenkins was not disparaging the Book of Mormon as such. He said it held great value, seriously, but not as history. It was not Hamblin, it was not the church, etc. It was not Mormon's faith that he was knocking down. It was a particular interpretation of the Book of Mormon, namely that it's history. That is what Philip Jenkins, in my estimate, entirely destroyed. And so I would hope you would share this with people who are online on your Facebook groups and your X, wherever you are, and let them know that the Phil Jenkins, Bill Hamblin argument discussion has been analyzed in detail and has been read through. You have received the vast majority of the debate. Yes, I picked and chose what I thought the core themes was, but I have tried to be fair on both sides, giving the full ideas, and I will continue doing so tonight. I'm still not sure I'm going to be able to finish tonight either. I will give it a good shot. So let's get this show on the road. Shredding, yes, that's what comes to mind. Yes, sir, Doug Vincent. It was, and I was at first amused. Then I became more and more appalled for Bill Hamblin, and by the end of this debate, I was overwhelmingly astonished at the pure power of staying focused on asking for just one item of actual archaeological evidence. And there is none. Now, so far as I'm aware, and I am happy to be correcting the evidence, you know, point me to where on YouTube or a particular book or whatever, where since these 9 years have passed by, still nothing has come forward. So this is significant in my opinion. I'm going to have to take off my glasses. You probably won't be, well, you will be seeing me, but I won't be seeing me. Hey, Words for Films. Good to see you. I will, let's get this started. Now before I do, hold on. I've got to share my screen. I'm excited to share this with you because they truly tried to present the best that they could. And hopefully that shows up. Yeah, it's on there. Okay, so I will just take off. He said, Jenkins ended by saying that without such positive, objective, verifiable evidence subject to the rules and conditions that I've laid out here, then you have zero grounds to support or advocate the historicity of the Book of Mormon other than religious faith. Note that Jenkins is not against religious faith using the Book of Mormon or believing the Book of Mormon in religious faith. He's saying it's your claim as history, which I am taking objection to. And I do believe Jenkins won that. I know there's going to be people who disagree with me. Most of them are going to be Mormons, etc. And that's all good. In that case, I would do what Jenkins asked and provide me with one piece of evidence. Well, Jenkins continues to mop the floor with Hamblin's epistemology. I have read your recent post on epistemology, which genuinely took me aback. And this is the link. And I have provided a link. I will provide links to video 1, 2, and part 3. The Nahom is not a bullseye in the description in this video. So be sure and look in the description. I'll provide you links. I will also link to Phil Jenkins just last year put all of the posts between him and Bill Hamblin in a one spot. And I will give you that link also so that you can go through it. I've been through this about 5 times and I am very, very deeply impressed. I enjoy this kind of intellectual scholarly research and I'm sure a lot of you do too. So be sure and hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the notification button. Give me some messages in the comments. Give me some comments. Even if you say thank you or whatever, because it does help the algorithm. And I would personally really like this, not because it's my channel, but because of the subject. This ought to be better known, especially in light of what I've discovered today on some new attempts at Mormon apologetics of some gold plates supposedly found in Saudi Arabia now, which I will be doing a Backyard Professor Responds. That's by the Stick of Joseph kids, the 2 brothers who have the YouTube, The Stick of Joseph, and they have completely fallen hook, line, and sinker in a rather naive fashion for a forgery. And it's sad because their critical thinking skills obviously are non-existent. And I will be doing the Backyard Professor Responds because they find the parallels which were planted in this forgery to fool the Mormon apologists, and it did in so many regards. Hundreds of Mormons in the comments said how it strengthened their faith in the Book of Mormon. Really sad. It's just sad. That leads right into this. This, again, is why it's so important. So I can't believe you wrote that. I will take very serious issue with your views. In previous dealings with Mormon apologists, Jenkins says, and they're basically very conservative individuals. I've been amused to see them resort often to radical postmodern approaches. And this suggests that, in effect, we should not be constrained by Enlightenment rationality, because all scholarly attempts to prove aspects of the Book of Mormon fail so egregiously. They then assume that the fault must lie in history and scholarship rather than the Book of Mormon itself. And I'm telling you, they're still doing this on YouTube. No kidding. They won't look at the book as having the fault. It's always the scholars who have a bias and prejudice, or history itself and all that, right? Well, that is when we start hearing the plaintive postmodern yelps. History and philosophy have moved on since then. Subjective approaches matter. History is consensus illusion. Oh, how naive you are to accept historical facts and objectivity. He's reviewing so many Mormons' approaches to his materials, and they're silly. Always watch for those damning POMO quotation marks. Well, I had hoped that you would not advance any such silly arguments in this cause, but then I groan to see you writing these words. So this is Bill Hamblin saying, this is the italicized part here. Whenever anyone demands objective evidence for historical questions, you know you're sick, dealing with a hermeneutical and epistemological misunderstanding or naivete. And oh, how they love to throw that out at us critics, right? At us careful thinkers, at us who use skepticism and doubt against really wild, weird claims, which is the best method, at least up front, until they establish their evidence. They say history in the sense of the actual human past does not exist. It cannot be directly observed. You cannot experiment upon it by giving Napoleon an extra division of infantry to see if he could win the Battle of Waterloo. History is a non-empirical discipline, and this is where Jenkins took exception to Hamblin very hard. We'll see that. History is a non-empirical discipline. That is pure bunk. And anything that is non-empirical cannot be objective. History clearly is not empirical. Thus, the demand for objective evidence represents a fundamental misunderstanding. Of course, we are always the ones who misunderstand from the apologist's point of view. We're used to being, told this, of both the nature of the human past and our ability today to understand it. So you can't observe it. Therefore, it's not objective reality. If anyone wrote this in my graduate history seminar, they would receive an instant F. Ouch. Yes, indeed, there are those POMO quotation marks. There's lots more in this vein, including your staggering assertion that Mesoamerican or pre-Columbian studies is likewise entirely subjective rather than scientific in nature, and that includes archaeology. In case my summary seems grotesquely improbable, Jenkins says, I will quote you precisely, we must correctly understand and interpret Mesoamerican evidence. None of this is objective. I will discuss that, Jim, in a separate post. As a bonus, you then proceed to say, we must correctly understand and interpret ancient Near Eastern evidence, essentially the same issue as number 2 above about Mesoamerica, but with a different data set. So we learn to our surprise, ancient Near Eastern evidence is likewise not objective, neither the history nor the archaeology. Well, does that ever take me back? You and I should get together sometime and hold a theme party for intellectual fads of the late 1980s. I think I can dig out my old Milli Vanilli albums. This is deja vu all over again. You do know that Michael Foucault has been dead since 1984, right? What he's saying is the apologetic intellectual approach to history is 40 years out of date, and they won't update. Which is very interesting. As you express it here, your approach, your epistemology is the antithesis of science or scholarship. It is the antithesis of the approaches to learning that the Western world has made central to the worldview since the Enlightenment. And yeah, unfortunately, your views really are that radical, or if you prefer, that reactionary. So let me give a concrete example. And he turns this back on Hamblin in a very interesting way. Imagine someone arguing today about the removal of the Confederate flag and making a stupid, obnoxious argument that, hey, most of the slave owners were actually African American themselves. You might not believe it, but yes, some people really do say that. No, say the historians, that is bunk and we can prove it. We have a huge array of documents and texts that prove that there might have been a few such black slave owners, but they were a tiny minority among the overwhelmingly white master class. In other words, let's reconstruct the objective reality of the past, and let's do it by empirical means. So here's how we do that. Here's how we explore the past history objectively. We'll form a hypothesis and we'll test it. Let's actually count the numbers and give percentages. And let's do it in a way that our methods are reproducible, falsifiable, and verifiable, as if we might ever neglect such a fundamental step in the major social science. Oops. Did I go and demand objective evidence? Did I forget that history is a non-empirical discipline? And anything that is non-empirical cannot be objective? What a naive fool I am. History, after all, does not exist. If you want slavery never to have existed, then poof, it never did. We make up the past as we go. So does not the example of the black slave owners make nonsense of your, Bill Hamblin's, arguments? Well, here's another instance. You are teaching a class and some anti-Semitic idiot pipes up to deny the existence of the Holocaust. You personally know he is totally wrong. Why? Because you really do believe in objective historical fact, and you try and give him evidence that it really happened. But suppose he says this. Well, gee, Dr. Hamblin, it was you that said that history in the sense of the actual human past does not exist. It cannot be directly observed. History is a non-empirical discipline, and anything that is not non-empirical cannot be objective. So history clearly is not empirical. So the demand for objective evidence represents a fundamental misunderstanding of both the nature of the human past and our ability today to understand it. How do you answer your student, Dr. Hamblin? See, back on planet Earth, in reality, whenever anyone demands objective evidence for historical questions, you know you are dealing with an intelligent working historian. There's the key. The story would be funny if it were not so tragic. Well, the only good news is that you, Dr. Hamblin, you don't really believe this guff either. At least you assuredly do not manifest any such postmodern attitudes or methodologies in the admirable and intelligent writings of yours that I'm currently reading on the history of the ancient Near East, where you emerge as so endearingly traditional, conservative, and old-fashioned in your approaches. In your own writings on the ancient Middle East, at least, you clearly accept conventional beliefs about objective historical fact, and you consistently demand high standards of evidence, defined in the most mainstream and conventional manner. And I respond, so we do know the Mormon apologists have double standards for their own pet books of scripture. That is most revealing. Bill Hamblin and all you Mormon apologists, you are not allowed to abandon all those exacting standards the moment you land in Yucatan in Mesoamerica. You can't just put on a radical postmodernist hat when all your other arguments fail, as they universally have. BYP responds, bingo. Jenkins says, I should add one more thing by way of a preemptive strike. In debates over cultural theory, I sometimes hear a disparaging remark on the lines of, you must be afraid of such radical and subversive ideas, which is why you won't understand or accept them, which seeks to disarm your opponent or critic. Well, before you are tempted to utter such words to me, Philip Jenkins, do please read my several books on the topic of social theory, social constructionism, and the social construction of reality, especially my 1994 title, Using Murder, and my 1998 book, Moral Panic, Yale University Press. I've worked and published in these areas a great deal more than you ever have. Actually, I have several significant publications using and analyzing such postmodern methodologies. You have none. You'll notice that these older titles of mine are older. In my view, these POMO debates are now passé and really no longer of interest. The world actually has moved on. So I would ask people reading this blog to consider something carefully. Now, you may agree with Dr. Hamblin on many things. You might believe in the Book of Mormon as a historical text. But do you realize the sheer weirdness and far-out nihilism of the views that Dr. Hamblin is presenting on the nature of reality, the character of history, and the non-existence of objective truth? There is no real world. It's all an illusion. History does not exist. So you take a moment to read again that paragraph above beginning, whenever anyone demands objective evidence. Do you agree with a word of that insofar as it is intelligible? In my view, the ideas he expresses represents intellectual suicide. If this idea that the past does not actually exist, that everything is subjective illusion, is situated in any religious tradition, the only one I can think of is mystical Buddhism. Do you realize how totally in theory Dr. Hamblin is prepared to reject all science and scholarship in order to support his views about the Book of Mormon? Are you Mormons prepared to follow him along that particular road? You mean that doesn't bother you? Does he speak for you? See, critically, I must also explain something for people who don't know the academic world at first hand. Now this kind of took my breath away, because he's really, he's tweaking Dr. Hamblin. You might think from his comment, everybody knows this tone, or actually, you may think from his everybody knows this tone that Dr. Hamblin is reflecting some kind of a new consensus or an orthodoxy among academic historians, leaving me, Dr. Philip Jenkins, as a naive and ill-informed reactionary, floundering amidst this brave new intellectual world. To say he isn't in any kind of a consensus would be a cosmic understatement. In any standard history department in the United States, Bill Hamblin's views, as he has expressed here in this debate, would sound just as reckless, flaky, and eccentric as they do to any ordinary layperson. His views are so far removed from the academic mainstream that you can only see them on a clear day. Let's make this clear. These are his quirky ideas and virtually nobody else's. I can't speak for the approaches of the BYU History Department specifically, but I've always assumed that it was strictly mainstream and highly reputable. They even have people there who believe in objective reality. So would any BYU historians or archaeologists reading this care to comment on his denigration of their disciplines? Notice how Jenkins turns the table. See, Hamblin thought he was going to come in here and just manhandle Jenkins with his intellectual nihilism and philosophy. Jenkins is just destroying him. On a non-academic point, I do get tired of Dr. Hamblin's refusal to answer straight questions. Now, we've seen enough by now to see that is what's happening. Notionally, on the basis of his woolly theoretical framework, I've always aimed to follow a say what you mean and mean what you say approach. And I believe in answering direct questions frankly and simply without shilly-shallying. I suppose that is also naive. See, people sometimes advance a methodology with the hope of establishing common ground for discussion. Now, what rational person would agree to share the fantasy world that Dr. Hamblin portrays here? I emphasize this part. No scholar would ever accept these assumptions as ground rules for debate. This would be like trying to debate a young earth creationist who insists that I must first agree that the solar system is 10,000 years old, and then we can proceed from there. Ouch. Dr. Hamblin, the good news for me in all of this is that you are situating yourself so far outside the known academic universe as to destroy any credibility that might theoretically attach to any of your observations or propositions, especially about Mesoamerica and the Book of Mormon. If I want to discredit your arguments, all I really need to say is just read what he wrote. See, this is too easy. By the way, in all future exchanges, whenever Dr. Hamblin uses the word naive, I will assume he means competent, rigorous, professional historian. I will take it as high tribute. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud when I read that. Yeah, Jenkins is on a roll. So, this, seriously, this is where it really gets bizarre. From Hamblin's point of view, I'm serious. To see this is amazing. Hamblin now baits Jenkins. And this baiting backfires absolutely astoundingly. Hamblin just blissfully carries on as if he didn't read a thing Jenkins says. So here is Dr. Hamblin. Professor Jenkins insists that there should be objective evidence for the Book of Mormon. So my question for Jenkins is, what would he consider objective evidence for the Book of Mormon? I'm not talking about vague categories. See the blue text below. Has he been daydreaming and sleepwalking for 2 months? We've been discussing the significant. How many times did Jenkins ask for one piece of evidence, a pottery sherd, an inscription, something? And Hamblin is now asking, what would you consider objective evidence for the Book of Mormon to be? Wow. We've been discussing the significance of inscriptional evidence and the paucity thereof of pre-classic Mesoamerica. All, of course, entirely irrelevant. Hamblin still isn't getting it. Jenkins seems to think that the paucity of inscriptional evidence is a decisive argument against the Book of Mormon. No, Jenkins thinks the paucity of inscriptional evidence is a decisive argument against the Book of Mormon being history, being grounded on a ground reality level. You notice how Hamblin isn't quite getting the point. Don't know if that's because he's being obdurate or if he just can't fathom it. So my question, and here he baits Jenkins. Watch how Jenkins handles this. This is so beautiful. So my question for Professor Jenkins is this, and this is Hamblin in blue. If we had a Mesoamerican inscription which mentioned a Book of Mormon king with a date and historic context that matched the date and the context for the Book of Mormon, would that be objective evidence in favor of the historicity of the Book of Mormon? Now, if Hamblin had this, why on earth did he not give this 2 months ago right up front? This is what Jenkins has been asking for. I should also note that Professor Jenkins has seriously misunderstood my position on epistemology, empiricism, and objectivity of our knowledge in the past. I'll explain it to you. Yeah. Jenkins doesn't understand diddly spit, according to the apologists. Yeah, they always have to take that route. We now know why. So here is how Jenkins responded, and he puts it in red. So Jenkins says, oh, you ask if we had a Mesoamerican inscription which mentioned a Book of Mormon king with the date and historic context that matched the date and context for the Book of Mormon. Would that be objective evidence in favor of the histories of the Book of Mormon? Briefly, yes, of course. Provided, of course, that the date and authenticity of that inscription was confirmed. I've actually tried to be specific and wide-ranging about the kinds of evidence that would fit this criteria, so that I don't think I've ever used vague categories. Of course you haven't. Hamblin's still trying to intimidate him for whatever dumb reason. If I have indeed misunderstood your position on issues of historicity and epistemology, then I will certainly apologize. I'll look forward to your clarification. Now Hamblin throws down the gauntlet of evidence, snaring Philip Jenkins, except, astonishingly, for a detail that his own Mormon scholar apologist friend gave him, which Hamblin gave to Jenkins up front in blue lettering, literally what his friend said destroys Hamblin's piece of evidence that he gives to Jenkins, which he presents to Jenkins anyway. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, you guys. I've never laughed so hard that I cried for many years like I did reading this. This is simply staggering. Here is Hamblin's introduction. Note, my friend Mark Wright, a professional Maya scholar and linguist, just informed me that recent phonetic interpretations of the glyph traditionally rendered as Kish/Kish below are now thought to read Kokan. If the new interpretation is correct, then this argument is rendered moot. I mean, Hamblin has nothing, and yet he's presenting this as the key piece of Book of Mormon, archaeologically confirmed evidence of an actual person in the Book of Mormon. Watch how he does this. It is breathtaking. So now that we've got some of the methodological issues on the table with no agreement, and have discussed the paucity of preclassic inscriptions, I would like to turn to the Temple of the Cross inscription at Palenque, which was built in the late 7th century AD. Okay, late 7th century AD, entirely out of the Book of Mormon time. There is an inscription in the central shrine on the top of the temple which celebrates the coronation of King Kinish Khan Baalam II, or Kinish Khan Balaam, or Kinish Chan Balum of Palenque, and it gives his divine and royal ancestry. The inscription starts with the creation of the world, then passes through various acts of the gods to the first enthronement of the legendary founder of the Palenque dynasty, an ancestor of Knishan Balaam. The founder is named Ukish Khan. Note, his name would have been pronounced something like Ukish or Wakish. So here is a translation of the inscription, glyphs E10 through F17 on the left panel, continued on glyphs P1 to Q3 on the right panel. 2 days, 12 months, 1330 years after the day 9 Ik, 13 August had occurred. Born then was Ukish Khan. His name was, Matt, the divine Mat Lord. It was 8 days, 7 months, 26 years after Ukish Khan had been born. Then it was the white bark paper, the headdress, tying onto the head of Ukish Khan, the royal coronation, on 11 Kaban o Pop, March 28, 967 BCE. He became the divine Palenque Lord. Text and photographs follow. So, text, drawings, translation, and commentary can be found in Linda Sheely and Friedel, A Forest of Kings, 246-247. 4 things are claimed about Ukish Khan in this inscription. Chronology is the 10th century BC. Name Ukish Khan. Title is a king. His function, the legendary founder of the Palenque royal family. So, this figure can now be compared with King Akish. Ukish Khan Akish in the Book of Mormon, who is discussed in Ether 8 through 9. So first, as to chronology, Akish was a Jaredite. So although there is insufficient data to precisely establish the Jaredite chronology, it is clear he lived in the early pre-classic formative period. That's 1800 BC to 400 BC. So the name Akish is broadly homophonous with Ukish Khan, phonetically Wakish. The Khan suffix means serpent and is probably a title. So Maya kings frequently took titles of Khan, serpent, Balaam, jaguar, or predatory birds, given the well-known phenomenon of the change of pronunciation of proper names through time and through cultures. The Maya Ukish is a close homophonic, that is, it sounds similar, homophony. It is a close sounding familiar name match to the Book of Mormon Akish some 1,500 years earlier. And okay, you call this evidence, huh? I put 3 question marks up here. The third thing is title. Both men were kings. Their function, both men were founders of a new dynastic line, Ether 9-6. So, now I've highlighted the important words in this next paragraph. It would seem then that the Maya kings of Palenque had a vague recollection of their legendary ancestor from Olmec times, whose name and function broadly parallels the story of Akish in the Book of Mormon. Given the sparse nature of the Mesoamerican data and the uncertainties of the pronunciation of Maya glyphs 1,500 years ago, the Akish-Ukish connection is as good as we can expect to find. It represents the existence of a Mesoamerican inscription of a Book of Mormon king with broad parallels in name and date and title and function. And I definitely have to respond to this. Jenkins will fillet this argument alive, and I don't spare it any mercy either. I respond. Now, this is, I'm taking information from that video that I made last Wednesday on the direct archaeological Bullseye, and Nahom is not it. I'm going to encourage you once again, go look at that video. It's excellent illustration of why Mormon apologists can't get correct. All of their parallels have problems, but there really are direct archaeological bullseyes. My video shows one of those, comparing it to the Nahom bullseye. Here is the issue. Compared to the exact, precisely, historically, archaeologically, linguistically perfect fit of the Sennacherib Assyrian invasion against the Jewish king Hezekiah in both biblical and Assyria literary and archaeological sources, cross-checking and cross-confirming each other to perfect precision of all details, and I am not exaggerating. Please go watch that video. This is so laughably sophomorish and wide of the mark, giving us yet more non-evidence as to astonish me more than if Jesus himself come down to me and tell me to get back into the Mormon church and accept the Book of Mormon on faith alone. Jenkins will get to this utterly embarrassing non-evidence in a moment. For now, he says this most significant summary of what has gone on, and it's devastating. They're actually almost a week behind each other in their comments, so we're kind of jumping back and forth a little bit. Jenkins says, in recent weeks, I posted several items concerning the historicity or the literal veracity of the Book of Mormon and have had some exchanges with Dr. Bill Hamblin at his blog, a debate that he suggested and initiated. And then he leaves a couple of links. Once again, you will observe Dr. Hamblin's scholarly approach in that he is not only hosting a debate like this, but he's also permitting his blog to be used to present strongly contrary views, which I will, tip my hat to Bill Hamblin. He really did have Jenkins have his full say. That's very nice. Most Mormons would not do that. So Hamblin gets kudos for that. Well, you can follow the whole story yourself, but if you have any interest in the topic, do read that post in particular. I am drawing attention to it here because it is so central to my case. Basically, this represents pretty much everything I have to say in these Book of Mormon arguments, and it is what I would refer to in answer to any and all future questions on these matters. If you think that anything that follows below is sketchy or it skips over major points in an argument, that is because I am summarizing a much longer piece, so of course I am leaving out a great deal. I have already read this. I believe I got to it in the first part one. If not, I got to it in part 2. But his summary here even adds a lot more context, which is why I want to reread this. This is a really excellent summary in very rough summary. He says very rough. I thought it was pretty good. Using the customary 10-point sequence. Number 1, any discussion of historicity, or say literal truth, this has to focus first on the question of whether any or all of the peoples, the societies, the languages described in the book actually were present in any part of the Americas at the time the book describes. Every other issue and claim is subsidiary. Okay, that's point number 1. And he's right. We have to first establish this. Number 2, given the lack of textual evidence, that has to be an archaeological question then, rather than a subject for academic history. And of course, where contemporary texts do survive, as in the case of the ancient Maya, then history and archaeology can and must be put together, integrated. But otherwise, archaeology simply must take precedence. All biblical archaeologists know this, you guys. He's not saying anything new here. This is exactly correct. That observation determines the methodologies that we have to use. That's why we have to do the archaeology. Okay. Number 3, archaeology is a science with well-established rules and principles. It is empirical in nature, and it pursues familiar science. Now, it didn't used to be thought this. This is the other interesting thing, you guys. Hang on. I will share with you where I went wrong as an apologist on just this subject. And I really loved this subject, of course, as an apologist. In the 1960s and 1970s, it was thought that archaeology was very subjective and very limited in its appeal to grasping the ancient situations. And so everybody was emphasizing written texts. Hugh Nibley jumped on this bandwagon really strongly. And that is why Nibley's parallels, he never did grasp the significance of archaeology. He poo-pooed it so that he could elevate the written texts like Hamblin's trying to do here. And that's why Nibley's parallels were always with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Gnostic writings, the ancient Ugaritic texts, the Enuma Elish, the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts, the Book of the Dead, the coffin texts, etc. Nibley emphasized the written documents. This view of archaeology has changed. It is not how they do it now. They certainly love when texts are also discovered. There is no question about that. But the archaeology, the get in the dirt, to dig through the layers, the various strata for the dating and the timing of how old the civilizations were, because in the ancient Near East, they all built upon each other's towns and temples and houses, etc. But today, really sincerely, the in the dirt archaeology is premium most important. Hi, Geoplanet Jane. Good to see you. Hey, Bubbly Bubble. Good to see you. Dan Vogel, hi. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. JC, Words for Films. I hope I'm saying hi to everybody. If I skip some of you, please forgive me. Hope you're enjoying this. Let me get back to this, because now there's something really important that Jenkins is sharing that is critical. Archaeology is a science. It's well-established rules and principles. It is empirical in nature, and it pursues familiar scientific practice in making and testing hypotheses. So any claims or statements must be testable, refutable, and falsifiable. This is not just academia being snotty. This is not just academia being obnoxious so as to eliminate the faith propositions of any given religion who either archaeology is arguing against or arguing with. This is how it works. And this is what Nibley did not like about it. You have to make it testable, you have to make it refutable, and you have to make it falsifiable. I describe at some length what these principles are, how they work in practice within the realm of archaeology. So archaeology, like any discipline, also has clear standards about what claims can be considered credible. Generally, this implies peer review publication. This is not because they're snooty and highbrow. It must be explored across the board by believers and unbelievers alike. You have to have an outside reference, which is the thing that makes Sennacherib's archaeological discoveries so powerful to confirming the biblical king Hezekiah in Judah, 701 BC, because you don't just have the Bible. You have the Bible and Hezekiah's enemy in his own view and writings. That is what makes that a bullseye. That's important. Peer review publication has to happen. So evidence cannot be considered if it's merely anecdotal. That is, if you're telling a story. Well, I talked to an Indian chief once years ago, one Mormon says, and he confirmed to me that his fathers had the Urim and Thummim. That's a story. That's anecdotal. That's not evidence. As nice as the story is, as faith promoting, as sweet as it makes you feel in your heart, no, it's not evidence. It can't be used. So, or leaving an impression. And Jenkins' view of John Torrance's book, Mormon Codex, is all impressionistic. There's no point in citing vague, generic parallels that supposedly exist between Old and New Worlds, and yet this is the only kind of evidence Mormon apologists have to offer. And that's why they fail. So I respond, the Mormon here we go, see? The Mormon apologist's favorite, nay, only form of evidence, which is not evidence, is showing vague parallels. Yeah, Dan Vogel's in the audience. He'll verify that with you if you think I'm pulling your wool over your eyes. So the fourth item, the far-reaching statements made by the Book of Mormon about the New World, these stand in stark contrast to any kind of scholarly consensus in any recognized discipline, whatever. Doubly so because of the wholly supernatural claims on which they are based. This is not trying to be religiously biased. Supernatural claims have to, by their very nature, have a higher standard of actual on-the-earth evidence in order to be verifiable. That's not bias. That's the way it is. You think I'm kidding? If the Jehovah's Witness leader today stood up and announced in the New York Times and got on every TV station for an hour-long program where he insisted Jesus Christ, the Lord God, told him in a personal discussion in his bedroom late at night one night that Joseph Smith's Mormonism is false, how many of you Mormons would accept that claim? I'm not trying to be facetious here. I'm trying to get you to see that this man had better present really doggone good credentials. Yes, you know as well as I do, every Mormon out there would just simply dismiss it. The good news is, so would I. Just chuck it out. You don't even have to take time to read everything this guy has written in order to verify that he had that discussion with Jesus. No, that's why it's so important, because of the holy supernatural claims, and they are therefore extraordinary in nature. Of course they are. Mormons even know this, but they love to poo-poo that and say, no, that doesn't apply to us. Yes, it does. So this evidence must be subject to the strictest criteria and the highest standards of proof. It must be testable, refutable, and falsifiable. So the fifth point, and because of this extraordinary quality, any statements made in support of the Book of Mormon's historicity now, understand this, he's not talking about its religiosity, he's not talking about its theology. He is specifically focusing on the historicity, you guys. Well, this must be positive in nature, in the sense that when you make a specific claim, must first be advanced by believers for testing and verification. The burden of proof is wholly on those who are making the claims. Non-believers, we are not required to do anything in order to disprove statements made by the Book of Mormon. We can just walk away. So I don't believe it. You have to make your test case. That's how it works. Number 6, I have had a great many repeated requests for any proposed piece of credible objective evidence of this kind that might be subjected to such a process of testing and verification. Far from requesting comprehensive proofs of the entire book, that's not what we're asking, because that's virtually impossible anyway. I have simply requested just merely one single piece of credible evidence that might confirm the Book of Mormon's account of the New World in history. Okay. As examples, I've cited the kinds of items that are so regularly used by archaeologists. Architectural remains, inscriptions, metalwork, pottery, weaponry, stuff like that. I am, of course, defining the realm of archaeology widely so he's trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here, so that evidence derived from genetics or linguistics would also be welcome. Yeah, let's bring anything and everything to the table. But you have to present your case. So, number 7, to date, I've never received or seen even a hint of any such credible positive evidence concerning the New World. Number 8, in the total absence of such evidence, it is impossible for any debate to proceed. We must hold the default position that the Book of Mormon was entirely composed by an American author in the early 19th century, because that's when it appeared. It has no validity whatever as a picture of the pre-Columbian Americas. Number 9, my conclusion to Dr. Hamblin is therefore as follows: without such positive, objective, verifiable evidence subject to the rules and the conditions that I have laid out here, then you have zero grounds to support or advocate the historicity of the Book of Mormon, other than religious faith. And the downside of presenting it from a religious faith perspective now is that is not susceptible to academic discussion or examination. Yet you're claiming an empirical claim of historicity. That is why the apologist has to make the case. This is very straightforward. Number 10, ergo, we cannot even speak of a debate or a controversy about the historicity of the Book of Mormon. The book is a product of religious faith, and it must be received on the basis of religious faith. Well, why aren't apologists taking that approach? The church actually has killed the apologetics of the Farms group at BYU. They've gotten rid of it. They dismantled it. And they are actually taking it back to the basis of religious faith. It's just that the old apologists don't like that. See, but this has nothing to do with scholarship. So these 10 points represent a minimal statement of my case. Personally, I would add that it is inconceivable to me that such a supposed mighty and long-lasting civilization as portrayed in the Book of Mormon, now you got to recognize it's 1,000 years. That's a long time. They should have vanished without leaving any traces whatever. Material, genetic, or linguist. I just don't believe it. And I say that on the comparative basis of looking at a great many civilizations and cultures worldwide. It is the lack of the genetic evidence in particular that is utterly damning. Nor am I convinced by any arguments I've yet seen that attempt to explain or account for these enormous and telling absences. So in the context of this present argument I'm having with Dr. Hamblin, my views on that subject are superfluous, as I have no obligation to produce any evidence whatever. And it doesn't matter whether it's going to be positive or negative. Doesn't matter. I don't have to make a case being the unbeliever, because I'm not making the claim. As I've said, the burden of proof is always on the person who makes the claim. So I will reiterate one key passage in my text. I stress these criteria and their origins so that you and your readers can see that I'm not inventing them by myself out of whole cloth. No, I'm in no sense trying to invent special rules to apply to the Book of Mormon that I would not apply to other topics or areas. I would apply them to any subject. These are fundamental principles of science in general and of social science in particular. And now it is at this point that I am so delighted I got to tonight. Hang on. This is, and I, hold on. For now, this is my favorite part of the argument, of the debate. Because now Neil Rapalai shows up. And he has written an absolutely devastating critique of Philip Jenkins' argument. And Hamblin posted it. He said, oh, hey, keep your eye on this kid. He's sharp. In fact, he's so sharp, he's going to show Philip Jenkins how the real issues work. And Rapelye presented a really good apologetic response. Now, I, as an apologist, used this same approach. I really did. I had the same philosophy. I was so familiar with this, you guys. Now, I had stopped being an apologist when this debate took place. I was just barely done with it by, say, a year or so. When I read Rapelye's response, I got all giddy inside. I got excited. I said, yeah, what about that? Yeah, take that. And this was after I had lost my faith. It was just so embedded in me, man, that when I saw this brought back up, I was very, very curious how Philip Jenkins was going to be able to get out of this. His response just blew me away. Wow. So I'm going to take the time to read the entire paper of Neil Rapelye. I must do this. It's somewhat long. But this gives me the opportunity to say I am giving the apologists their best foot forward, not from me editing stuff out of their argument so to goof up their powerful argument or to miscontext them. I'm going to give you the full bam of Neil Rapelye right on the chin of Philip Jenkins. And Jenkins simply grabbed his fist, turned around, threw his argument down, and crushed it. So here we go. I will give you both the full argument against Phil Jenkins and the full response of Phil Jenkins. And the reason I'm excited to do this, the reason I'm grateful I can do this, is because we see the difference between an apologist and a scholar once again. And it's exquisite. So I am very excited for this part of the presentation. Let me just bear with me. I promise it's worth it. And I'm going to try to read it so that you're not bored with it. You know, I'm not going to just sit here and blasé, monotone read this. I got to get my throat wet. So Neil Rapelye, my friend Neil Rapelye, recently posted an important response. Notice Hamblin is excited too. To some of the things Jenkins has been saying. With his permission, I'm posting his entire article here, and I am likewise going to read the whole thing. He is an excellent young Mormon scholar. It is found at the Studio et Coco Fide, if you want to read it. Keep your eyes on him. The rest of this post is by Neil. Scripture and Western liberal orthodoxies. James K. Hoffmeyer is the leading advocate for a historical exodus and the general reliability of the biblical text in supporting the exodus. His books on the subject were published by Oxford University Press. He is a well-respected Egyptologist. In a paper published in 2012, Hoffmeyer advanced the view that the Exodus and wilderness narratives are central to the Old Testament theology, and that without them, the tapestry of Israel's faith and the foundational fabric of Christianity unravels. These things happened why a historical exodus is essential for theology. In Do Historical Matters Matter to Faith? Edited by Hoffmeyer and Margery, 2012, page 106. So Hoffmeyer marshals a number of passages throughout the Old Testament, which he feels illustrates the centrality of the Exodus to the faith of ancient Israel. Again and again, Hoffmeyer notes Israel was called to trust in the Lord because he led them out of Egypt. So the Exodus was foundational, and if it didn't actually happen, then the primary grounds for trusting the Lord was a falsehood. Now, this is critical. So Hofmeyr also appeals to modern trends to boost up his argument. He notes that in Western nations where critical biblical scholarship has cast greater skepticism on the historicity of biblical narratives, and especially the Exodus, Christianity has been struggling while it thrives in nations less affected by such intellectual trends. In this regard, Hofmeyr appeals to Philip Jenkins, whom he quotes as saying, "The churches that are doing best in the world as a whole are the ones that stand farthest from Western liberal orthodoxies, and we should learn from their success." Quoting Philip Jenkins, The Next Christendom, the Coming of Global Christianity. So under normal circumstances, I probably would have read past this without raising an eyebrow. This citation struck me, however, because Philip Jenkins has recently written a series of blog posts on the historicity of the Book of Mormon, all of which simply dismiss the possibility out of hand and never really engage any of the literature on the subject. William J. Hamblin has drawn Jenkins into a bit of a debate on the matter, but the exchange is only making slow progress, if any at all. So the appearance of Jenkins' name in this paper stood out to me. Assuming that Hofmeyr has properly represented Jenkins' sentiments, it is strange to me that he would then turn around and suggest that the historicity of the Book of Mormon has not the slightest impact on the existence or growth of the LDS Church, nor should it. He goes on to explain, newcomers join for excellent personal reasons in search of community, of values, new and better models of family. They're not going to abandon those powerful and enticing structures, those networks of community and family, just because a supposedly inspired text is wrong about ancient archaeology. And religion, any religion, is vastly more than a single scripture. It is composed of the traditions and history accumulated by believers over the centuries, their experiences, their memories, their shared daily realities. It is a matter of culture. And when I say that, do not take it as meaning something trivial or dismissive. Isn't culture a vehicle for progressive revelation? As I say, I am speaking of any and all religions, Christian and otherwise. Yet these sentiments are exactly the opposite of his observations cited by Hofmeyr, assuming again that Hofmeyr has properly represented Jenkins. Many of the same tensions that exist in other Christian denominations between conservatives and liberals on matters of scripture and historicity, these are also prevalent within Mormonism, and extend to LDS unique scriptures such as the Book of Mormon, where the miraculous means by which the text was revealed, angels, gold plate, seer stones, these only serve to underscore the importance of historicity for Mormonism's keystone scripture. Liberal Mormons would disagree, of course, and conservative Latter-day Saints share the same or similar concerns as their Christian counterparts over the deleterious effects that liberalization of beliefs, which often entails abandoning the historicity of Scripture, these might have on the vitality of the Mormon faith. As cited by Hofmeyr, Jenkins seems to understand these issues within his own faith tradition. When he comments on Mormonism in the Book of Mormon, however, he seems to sing a different tune. So let's explore the Exodus and Philip Jenkins' rule of one. There are other reasons why Hofmeyr's essay was interesting in light of recent discussions. Jenkins has repeatedly thrown this out as a challenge to the Book of Mormon apologists. I offer a question. Can anyone cite any single credible fact, object, site, or inscription from the New World that supports any one story found in the Book of Mormon? One shred of pottery, one tool of bronze or iron, one carved stone, one piece of genetic data, and by credible I mean drawn from a reputable scholarly study, an academic book or refereed journal, not some cranky piece of pseudo-scholarship or science. Jenkins calls this the rule of one. And he basically insists that if something cannot stand up to this standard, there's no point in having any kind of conversation about it. Jenkins would later acknowledge that, nor of course is the Bible immune to historical challenges. If we took a survey of contemporary historical scholarship, we would find many scholars who give no credibility to statements in that book referring to times before the Exodus. And quite a number would discount the existence of Moses. The fact of the Exodus itself has been an academic battleground for decades. The reality of Solomon, David, and their immediate successors is fiercely debated, as minimalists deny the historic value of pretty much everything in the Bible before the 6th century BC. He considers these debates as wholly different from those about the Book of Mormon and considers himself a conservative on these issues. I'm quite conservative on those matters to the point of defending the existence of Moses as well as David's dynasty. I believe in Moses partly because nobody would have invented such a convincingly foreign Egyptian name for the great Jewish national hero. I also think that on occasion, the minimalists are so determined to avoid evidence that runs against them that they themselves act like blinkered fundamentalists. But that is a debate for a later column. Not that my opinion really matters on this, but I tend to agree with Jenkins here, although I note the Egypticity of Moses' name is subject to some debate. To some extent, I also agree that these are a different kind of issue than the Book of Mormon and pre-Columbian archaeology. Both the text and the archaeology is different, and those differences are important to understand, but they are not wholly different. Take the Exodus, for example. The basics of the biblical story here are that a family or a clan migrated from Canaan into Egypt, stayed there for about 400 years, where their posterity grew into a large population, so large that the Egyptians considered them a threat and forced them into slavery, killed their newborn males, etc., until one day the Lord sent Moses in to set them free by way of incredible miracles. We're all familiar with this story. This large population of Israelites then wanders the desert for 40 years before finally entering the promised land. In the narrative, at least 2 Israelites, Joseph and Moses, hold prominent positions within the Egyptian government. Well, this makes for a decent comparison to the Book of Mormon, because it likewise tells a story that starts with a family or small clan, smaller than that of Israel, in fact, which then grows into a large population over the course of several hundred, actually about 1,000 years. And like the Book of Mormon, in the New World, there is not a single scrap of evidence for the Israel in Egypt or Sinai. In fact, one could aptly paraphrase Jenkins here. Can anyone cite any single credible fact, object, site, or inscription from Egypt or Sinai that supports any one story found in the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers? One sherd of pottery, one tool of bronze or iron, one carved stone, one piece of genetic data. The fact is, there is no evidence to support the idea that the Israelites were ever there. No pottery, no inscriptions, no tools, no cities. In fact, there's no evidence to even suggest that Israelites existed before the 13th century BC. And by then, they were already in Canaan, and most experts, such as William Deaver, Israel Finkelstein, I'm giving Rapelye a bonus point for citing good people, would argue that they were an indigenous group, not immigrants from Egypt via the Sinai. Again, in Canaan, there is no single piece of evidence to support a migration from Egypt. There's no pottery, there are no inscriptions, no tools, no cities. The Merneptah Stela, 1208 BC, supports the existence of Israelites in Canaan, but not that they came from Egypt. Archaeological assemblages of pottery, etc., are also argued to indicate the rise of Israel around this time. But whether such assemblages can actually represent an ethnic group, well, that's continually being debated, and these would not satisfy the rule of one anyway. They are, after all, assemblages of several pieces of data, and they tend to point, again, as per Deaver and Finkelstein and others, they point to indigenous origins. So the inscription on the Merneptah Stela likely passes Jenkins' rule of one test, but doesn't really help with the Exodus. And since Jenkins insists that there must be evidence for the ethnic group before proceeding with the conversation, see several of his comments scattered across Hamblin's blog, then we must wonder how he can accept Moses and an Exodus given the lack of evidence for the Israelites as a people in Egypt in the second millennium BC and prior to the 13th century at all anywhere. Without the Merneptah Stela, even the existence of Israelites in Canaan, the 13th century, would fail the rule of one test. So in addressing the silence of Egyptian evidence, as charged by a particular biblical scholar, Hofmeyr does not rush to produce any single credible fact for the Exodus. Instead, he starts to discuss why such an expectation is methodologically and epistemologically unsound. First, the Delta of Egypt, within which was the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews resided, is the least excavated area of Egypt. Second, because of the moist environment of northern Egypt from millennia of annual Nile inundations, objects made from perishable materials do not survive. In fact, not a single scrap of a papyrus document has survived from the Delta from pharaonic times. Only a few Roman-era papyri have been found in Tanis, thanks to the carbonized condition of some that were kept in clay jars, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Third, those who excavate at Delta sites are normally limited in accessing lower levels from earlier history owing to high water tables. So when a biblical scholar points out that there is no Egyptian evidence to support the presence of Hebrews in Egypt or for the Exodus, it is rash to conclude that this absence of evidence is evidence of absence. This is not unlike Hamblin's own attempt to explain why the kind of evidence Jenkins is insisting on and why simply measuring up to his rule of one is not reasonable for the Book of Mormon in pre-Columbian American. I should note that it would not be accurate to say that Hofmeyr thinks there is no evidence. There's plenty of evidence, which he complies and discusses in his volumes published through Oxford University Press, but it is largely circumstantial, and it does not meet the rule of one criteria of Professor Jenkins. This is similar to the scenario for the Book of Mormon. So, unsurprisingly, the same biblical minimalists that Jenkins criticizes in the above respond much the same way that Jenkins does when these issues get raised. They dig in their heels, they demand that the apologists produce the evidence as they have narrowly defined it, or just shut up. Yet, as Hofmeyr demonstrates with the Exodus, the strength of the case is not in any single credible fact, but in a myriad of subtle circumstantial details that converge between the text and the external data. As such, there is no single data point that can satisfy a challenge like that of Jenkins for the Exodus. And the things are similar for the Book of Mormon and pre-Columbian America. Jenkins asserts over and over again that the Mormon apologists are methodologically impoverished. My word, not his. Yet the truth is that they have modeled what they do after the methods of scholars like Hofmeyr. I know this because I've read both the works of Mormon apologists and the works of Hofmeyr. I remember being struck by the similarity of argument and method when I first started reading Hofmeyr. I personally started reading Hofmeyr along with others like Kenneth Kitchen, William Deaver, Ian Provan, Israel Finkelstein, Baruch Halpern, and Amahai Mazar specifically, so that I could learn by their examples about how methodologically to engage with text and archaeology responsibly. In doing so, I did indeed begin to notice some methodological weaknesses in how some Mormon apologists have practiced what I'll simply call historicity studies, but others, and I'll go ahead and say most of those with professional degrees, have proved to practice historicity studies as rigorously as the above scholars do with the Bible. And when they haven't, Mormons themselves have not given other Latter-day Saints a pass on this. The recent review by Brant Gardner and Mark Wright of John Sorensen's Mormon Codex serves as the most recent example, but others could be cited going at least back into the 1980s when farms first started. So for some concluding thoughts from Neil Rapelye. As the saying goes, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. Alternatively, I think it is also true that is bad for the goose is bad for the gander. Moving away from historicity has been detrimental to the vitality of several faith communities of the last few centuries and decades, including Protestant Christianity. Now, that's not to say that some people can't make a meaningful faith out of less historical readings of Scripture. For those who can, I say more power to you. But as a whole, these sorts of approaches have proven to weaken Jewish and Christian and Mormon faith communities which have adopted them. Louis Midgley has written numerous essays on the subject within the Mormon context. Jenkins, as quoted by Hofmeyr, seems to understand that this is bad for the goose, his own evangelical Christianity, yet he recommends it to the gander, Mormonism. At the same time, based on his profession of being conservative on historical matters like the existence of Moses, etc., Jenkins seems to be, though I admit I do not know for certain, open to and even accepting of the methods and the arguments advanced by Hofmeyr and others on the Exodus. These arguments and their methodologies are good for the goose. Yet here he rejects them for the gander. To me, the double standard here seems obvious. But then again, I have tasted both the goose and the gander. In other words, I have read scholarship on both the historicity of the Bible and that for the Book of Mormon as well, whereas Jenkins keeps eating his goose while steadily refusing to try the gander. Perhaps herein lies the real problem. Get him, Neil. That's the end of Neil Rapelye's article. Philip Jenkins, what say you? Here we go. He takes Rapelye to school. It's the building behind the woodshed where Rapelye's argument is taken apart with a buzzsaw into 1,000 splinters of junk argument. Neil Rapelye is a Book of Mormon apologist. He recently did a piece about me at his blog under the title The Goose and the Gander, and he is fully entitled to take issue with me on anything and everything. I don't intend to respond to every criticism or comment he makes, but I am responding to this one because it raises interesting issues about methodology and the relationship between authentic history and pseudo-history. Although I am addressing this to him personally, the same arguments apply to most of the apologist's claims, particularly as they concern the Old Testament. I've had a couple of exchanges with Neil Rapelye in the past. Then as now, he strikes me as smart and literate. I am no less struck by the puzzling disconnect between the articulate nature of what he writes and the startling lack of sophistication of his arguments. By far, his weakest spot concerns his use of far-fetched and wildly unconvincing analogies, which instantly destroy the credibility of his arguments. More on that shortly. This may all reflect the fact that Book of Mormon apologists really never engage with mainstream scholars. Virtually no mainstream academic takes his cause seriously enough to be worth arguing with, so an apologist never has an opportunity to test his or her arguments in that academic setting. To oversimplify, Neil suggests that there really is remarkable little credible concrete evidence for many aspects of the Old Testament story, so we have no better or worse grounds to accept the literal truth of that narrative than we do for the Book of Mormon. There are two main rhetorical points at issue here. Number one, when apologists have totally failed to supply any objective, credible evidence for any detail in the Book of Mormon, as requested repeatedly, they regularly throw up a smokescreen about an unconnected topic. So, no. The menu item here is neither goose nor gander. It's wild goose, as in chase. Or maybe red herring is the better metaphor. Delicious, perhaps, but irrelevant. The second rhetorical tactic is basically, no, he can't produce a word of concrete evidence for the Book of Mormon, but he claims the same issues apply to the Bible as well. Christian claims depend just as much on faith as does the Book of Mormon. This has the rhetorical bonus of trying to divert the discussion away from the Book of Mormon, where his views are completely untenable and indefensible, and off to the Bible, where the real serious literature is immense. This art of diversion and obfuscation is a principal goal of ancient Book of Mormon studies, if not its chief reason. Let me explain why his biblical analogy is wholly bogus. As his central example, he takes the biblical story of the Exodus. He cites James K. Hoffmeyer, a fine and prestigious biblical scholar, absolutely reputable, but certainly at the conservative end of the spectrum. So Hoffmeyer says that the Exodus and wilderness narratives are central to Old Testament theology, and that without them, the tapestry of Israel's faith and the foundational fabric of Christianity unravels. That's his opinion, not mine, and not that of a sizable share of the academic profession examining the era, including a great many Christians and Jews. In my personal opinion, the argument has definitively gone against Hoffmeyer's point of view, even more in recent years. Just because Neil is a Book of Mormon fundamentalist doesn't mean that Christians and Jews have to be fundamentalists to be authentic believers. Neil then writes, as Hoffmeyer demonstrates with the Exodus, the strength of the case is not in any single credible fact, but in a myriad of subtle circumstantial details that converge between the text and the external data. As such, there is no single data point that can satisfy a challenge like that of Jenkins for the Exodus. And things are similar for the Book of Mormon and pre-Columbia America. I assume he was fighting to retain a straight face when he wrote that atrocity, and especially when he used the word similar. At an extreme minimum, here is what Hoffmeyer could plausibly argue by way of circumstantial detail for his Exodus. We have the rock-solid and well-documented fact that the pharaonic kingdom of Egypt existed. Please don't let's argue about that. We have the rock-solid and well-documented fact that Semitic peoples had often been in Egypt, that they had been a major part of the Hyksos coalition, and that many lived nearby under Egyptian suzerainty. We have the rock-solid and well-documented fact that in the 12th century BC, something called Israel appears in Canaan. We have the less solid fact that some of the Bible's very oldest verses, such as the Song of Miriam, might record something like an Exodus event, but I don't push that point. The most powerful single piece of evidence, of course, is the strong literary tradition of some kind of Egyptian connection, recorded no later than 3 centuries or so after that event. Taking them all together, might that suggest an Exodus? Maybe, but I would be careful in defining my terms. Just what do we mean by an Exodus anyway? Do we have to accept the 10 plagues? In any case, Hoffmeyer may well be right. Certainly there is some kind of Egyptian connection or context to the founding of Israel. Now let's look at how exactly similar, to quote the Mormon apologist, let's look how exactly similar things are for the Book of Mormon in pre-Columbia America. We have no documented facts, none, not a single one, that confirm or vaguely point to the existence of any peoples, nations, languages, places, or ethnicities in the New World that are described in Joseph Smith's book. None. Not now. Not ever. Never. Tell me again about your myriad of subtle, circumstantial details that converge between the text and the external data? Never mind a myriad. Just give me one credible data point. Try not to giggle when you do so. And the text, you say? In the context of the Book of Mormon, would that be a wholly unprovenanced document that emerged in 1830, not even in an ancient language, and which is more or less universally regarded as entirely lacking in authentic historical content? You mean that text? Unprovenanced is the most charitable word I can find right now. Go ahead, tell me that Reformed Egyptian is an authentic ancient language, and use any reputable Egyptologist you like to support that claim. I double dare you. Also, note the jaw-dropping, silly tactic here, comparing finding archaeological evidence for a single event, like the Exodus, which would have happened in a very short period of time, assuming it occurred, with seeking evidence for the supposed presence of a nation or community over a millennium. The archaeological footprint of a specific event is utterly and totally different from that of a community, nation, tribe, or city over such a long period. And if the Exodus wilderness story is true, then it mainly involves nomadic societies, quite different from the settled cities alleged in the Book of Mormon. Is that not all too obvious to be worth spelling out? Not obviously to Book of Mormon apologists. Night and day, black and white, apples and oranges. I'm delighted to see Neil reading my books. It might behoove him, though, to check out my 2011 book, Laying Down the Sword, in which I did discuss this Exodus in Egypt issue in some detail. I argue, as do most scholars, that Israel emerged out of historic Canaan from a variety of older ethnic groups and communities. Some might have been Egyptian-derived. I don't believe there's any hard archaeological evidence for the Exodus as described in the book of Exodus, with all the miracles and the stories. That is utterly different from the issue of some Semitic peoples in Egypt joining the movement to Canaan. Is there no single point of tangible material confirmation for the Exodus? Okay, so no big thing. Neil then gets into the early history of Israel, making the following cosmic leap. This makes for a decent comparison to the Book of Mormon because it likewise tells a story that starts with a family or a small clan, smaller than that of Israel, in fact, which then grows into a large population over the course of several hundred, actually about 1,000 years. And like the Book of Mormon in the New World, there's not a single scrap of evidence for the Israelites in Egypt or Sinai. In fact, One could aptly paraphrase Jenkins here. Can anyone cite any single credible fact, object, site, or inscription from Egypt or Sinai that supports any one story found in the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers? One sherd of pottery, one tool of bronze or iron, one carved stone, one piece of genetic data. Oh, good Lord. This is such baloney from start to finish. Can I produce such a piece of evidence for a particular individual, such as Abraham or Isaac or Moses? No. But for the people's being in the right place, roughly at the right time, obviously, yes. In the wagon loads. Were there Semitic peoples across the Fertile Crescent in the 3rd and 2nd century millennium BC? I don't know. Let's go ask the Akkadians, the Amorites, the Eblites, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians. Let's look for some tens of thousands of data points about this. Were the states and empires and kingdoms described in the Pentateuch there, including such casually mentioned people as the Hittites? Oh, yes, indeed. Were Semitic peoples living under Egyptian rule in Palestine and Syria? Yup. Evidence from Egypt itself, you ask? How about the Amarna letters? They clearly show the existence of Semitic nations, cities, and communities in Canaan, Palestine in the couple of centuries before the Exodus, and also indicate wandering bands of more or less certainly Semitic raiders, nomads, and marauders in that region and at that time. Some of those cities are named in the conquest narrative. Let's also look at the history of the Hyksos in Egypt from the 18th century BC onwards, not to mention all the visual and textual descriptions of Semitic peoples in Egypt and the territories under its control. And let's look at the consequences and aftermath of the eras examined. Suppose we are dealing with small clans in Israel and Mormon land. No sane person doubts that, whatever its origins, something called Israel existed for centuries after the 12th century BC, with the languages and the ethnic characteristics described in the Bible. That is beyond argument. Unless he is basing himself on unquestioning faith and dogma, no competent scholar believes that, whatever its origins, something called the Nephite polity existed in the New World, with the languages and ethnic characteristics described in the Book of Mormon. That is likewise beyond argument. Israel was incontrovertibly there. The Nephites just as incontrovertibly were not. And if you think they were, please start showing evidence. I'm getting tired of pleading. By the way, I don't have to produce evidence specifically from Egypt or Sinai, although, as I say, I easily can, because in my view, it's not essential to the story of Israel. Now, Hofmeyr would disagree. Neil writes the Merneptah Stela, circulated 1208 BC, supports the existence of Israelites in Canaan, but not that they came from Egypt. That's right. And it indeed proves the existence of Israel. Now show me one inscription from some other New World people to confirm the existence of any of your Book of Mormon fantasy folks. Any nation, tribe, language, city, people. Take your time. I'm sure you have a huge selection of candidates to choose from. A myriad, probably. Night and day, black and white, apples and oranges. Neil Rapalai also writes this. The fact that there is no evidence to support the idea that the Israelites were ever there in Egypt. You have no pottery, no inscriptions, no tools, no cities. In fact, there's no evidence to even suggest that Israelites existed before the late 13th century BC, and by then they're already in Canaan, and most experts, William Deaver, Israel Finkelstein, would argue that they were an indigenous group, not immigrants from Egypt through Sinai. Again, in Canaan, there is no single piece of evidence to support a migration from Egypt. No pottery, no inscriptions, no tools, no city. Now, and then Jenkins says, I actually agree with most of this and agree that Israel emerges in Canaan in the century or so following 1250 BC. That's the position I've taken in my writings. So what? But then look at the lunatic analogy. Neil then builds on that. Suppose that I can't prove that Semitic peoples are in Egypt in, say, the 13th century BC. Although everybody admits that their relatives had been there recently, and there were lots of Semitic peoples 100 miles or so to the east, really not far when they chose to hitch up their U-Hauls. That is, says Neil, precisely comparable to not being able to prove that similar peoples are in the New World over a period of a millennium or so, where the evidence for Semitic peoples ever having been present on the entire continent at any point before the time of the Spanish Empire is zero, nada, zilch, none. And that's a valid comparison? What there are you talking about? 0 plus 0 equals 0. 0 plus 0 cubed equals ancient Book of Mormon studies. Put another way, we know that the peoples, the languages, the ethnicities described in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, you left out Deuteronomy, well, they were in the regions described as an absolutely certain, incontrovertible, multiple documented fact. Did they rewrite their history some and reinvent their origins? Sure. And that's just like the Book of Mormon, isn't it? Where we are so sure that the peoples, the languages, and ethnicities described were in exactly the regions of the New World portrayed as an absolutely certain, incontrovertible, multiple documented fact. And that's why people like you and Bill Hamblin have failed totally to produce a single smidgen of evidence in support of their mere existence. And Bill Hamblin and his friends have been searching for decades. In other words, the situation with the Bible and the Book of Mormon is exactly identical, except that in the Mormon case, we have no trace of evidence that any of the people ever existed. Some difference, don't you think? Night and day, black and white, apples and oranges. Here's another key difference. Your view is entirely and totally based on faith, dogma, and alleged revelation. Mine depends on none of the above, although I would subsequently use that history as a basis for faith, and the same distinction applies to all Book of Mormon apologists. And here, let me explain. This is really rather important. Let's do a thought experiment. Assume, for the sake of argument, that... Hold on real quick. You still able to read that? Let's do a thought experiment. Assume, for the sake of argument, that we did not have the Bible as a source. Okay, so assume that we were reconstructing the history of Palestine in the first millennium BC using entirely non-scriptural sources, from archaeology, from non-scriptural texts and inscriptions, and from the various records, mostly texts and inscriptions, of outside nations. We would see Israel emerging in the 13th century, 13th to 12th century BC. We would have an excellent idea of its changing social and religious institutions through the centuries. We would know its languages. We would have plenty of writers, both contemporary and later ones, to fill in the names of the kings, the dynasties, so on and so forth. We would know a lot about its interactions with neighboring powers, not to mention the presence of Israelites in other nations and regions. We would know a huge amount about domestic architecture and social structures, modes of life, class structures, and so on, without using religious scriptures of any kind then. we would have an excellent view of Israel, its languages, ethnicities, people, and history. No sane person would doubt the existence of that Israel, although they might argue over details of its political history. Now look at Mormonia. Without the Book of Mormon, would any scholar ever have speculated about a Semitic or Middle Eastern presence of any scale or nature whatever in the New World? In 19th century racist crank theories, yes, but not in any kind of modern scholarship. If there was no Book of Mormon, we would have not the vaguest, slightest hint of any suggestion of a Middle Eastern Semitic presence. Without using religious scriptures of any kind, then, we would neither know about nor speculate on any kind of Nephite presence in the New World, its languages, ethnicities, people, and history. It would not exist because it doesn't. Therefore, your views depend entirely on alleged religious revelation, and that is why you are constantly scrambling to find real-world confirmation. That is also why your views are irrelevant to any kind of scholarship other than theology. What bothers me is not that you're preaching religion and revelation. Heaven knows. But that you don't recognize or acknowledge the fact. If you believe or preach differently, you are deluding yourself. Night and day, black and white, apples and oranges. Neil should be ashamed to post an offering like this. I said I respected Neil Rappley's intelligence and writing skills, and I seriously do. He's also fighting the last stand of ancient American Book of Mormon apologetics. And what a fall was there. From Joseph Smith's time through the mid-20th century, Mormons knew, as a matter of faith, that those ancient Semites had left huge footprints in the New World, not least in terms of the genetic origins of most or all of the Indians. Did not Nephites also run into the hundreds of thousands or the millions? Was not Illinois in the plains of the Nephites? Don't blame me for that observation. I'm citing a credentialed prophet, right? And then look what Neil Rappley has to say as his claim. Such convergence strongly suggests that the Book of Mormon is a particular version of Mesoamerican history, a version written from the perspective of a minority elite who traced their lineage to a small immigrant group from Palestine and maintained a form of Israelite religion. A minority elite that never made a mark, never did much, never grew to any size or significance, just a bunch of boring stay-at-home Guatemalans. Why do we have that decline? Because Neil wants, of religious necessity, to believe in the Book of Mormon, but he is astute enough to know how slim to non-existent are the forms of evidence that can be offered to grown-ups. The only way he can get around this is to postulate a story that makes no impact on the wider real-world narrative, and where he has any number of possible let-outs to explain the absolute lack of evidence for his cause, dare I say a myriad excuses. I would say that the minority elite story involves suspending a lot of the Book of Mormon narrative and assumptions, but hey, that's his problem, not mine. It's a nice picture, though. Instead of the mighty Nephite cities and civilizations dreamed of in days of yore from Joseph Smith's day, we have a tiny bunch of Semitic-derived transients shouting, "Look out, everyone! Here comes the gaze of historical research! Oh no, they're looking for objective evidence! Everyone go hide behind a palm tree until they're gone! Thank heavens we are just a minority elite!" That could be a great film. Does Mel Brooks do Mormon stuff? In summary, if you want to claim the truth for a single word of the Book of Mormon, then prove it. Don't try and prove the whole thing. Obviously, that's an impossible task. But go ahead and give me one piece of credible evidence that at some point before Columbus, The New World was home to some people who were derived from the Middle East, who were either Semitic or Semitic derived. Show me one piece of evidence not rooted in religious faith for the existence of such ethnicities, nations, cultures, or languages in the New World. Particularly, show me one piece of worthwhile evidence for this thing about them keeping up some form of Israelite religion. Good heavens, Dr. Jones, look there, over the carvings of the severed heads at the doorway of the Jaguar Temple. Isn't that a mezuzah? Dear Mr. Brooks, have I got a script for you? Does that sound like I'm making fun of you? Of course I am. But I am also asking a centrally relevant question. You've made this ludicrous assertion about Israelite religion in the New World. Produce one shred of non-faith-based evidence to prove it. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Hilariously improbable ones demand no less. So if in fact those communities were there for over a millennium, your task should be simple. Oh, heck, let me set the bar really low here. Don't bother trying to track down an individual or a name or a specific place. Just show me anything suggesting the mere existence of that Middle Eastern linked community in the New World for just one village, one family, one group. You won't do it because you can't. What you will do is spend a great many posts rambling about every other matter under the sun, explaining why nobody can or should ask for such an outrageous thing as evidence. The horror, the horror. And you'll do so until you hope your readers stop noticing the sleight of hand and pretend the whole issue goes away. And behold, it was all a bad dream. Am I wrong about that? Then show me. I mean, wow. That is as powerful as it gets. I've never seen such a massacre in my life. Not ever. Okay, look, I'm an hour and 3/4 already, man, and I am not even halfway through the other halfway that I was going to try to get halfway through. This thing is so long, but it's so important because both sides genuinely tried to throw and put in everything that they felt was solid. And that's what separates this argument from all the others that have ever occurred between Mormons and evangelicals, because this isn't about whose religious theology is correct. This is about the Book of Mormon as history, as opposed to theology or whatever other subject you want to make it. The church emphasized the history for quite a while. After Farms came about from 1980, and that was the year I discovered them, and I absolutely bought everything they ever published or produced that I could afford, and I've still got a whole bookshelf full of their stuff, including the entire Hugh Nibley collection. After 25, 30 years, the church saw the problem. You're making us look bad. But it really wasn't the Mormon apologists' fault, because there's no way to make them look good with that basis of the Book of Mormon as history. And so this has caused so many faith crises. And I'm going to attempt here briefly to give the church as much credit as I can. They might have actually recognized that. It is that claim to historicity that is causing the problems, and so they're trying to get away from that. They're trying to go to a more, follow the covenant path, they're chintzy sayings, have greater faith. doubt your doubts, etc. Quit. They did not give their own scholars credit or extra money for trying to defend the Book of Mormon historicity. Bill Hamblin was right, and he complained about it. I think they are trying to subtly move away from that and get more into a spiritual. And it's like Jenkins said, what would be wrong with reading and understanding the Book of Mormon and using it as a basis for religious symbolism and theology? It could be a really beautiful thing if we did that. But as crude, blunt, this actually happened, history, that's a no-win proposition. And who's to blame for that? The guy who brought it forward, Joseph Smith. I don't think he had the prophetic foresight to see very far down the corridor into the future to see the problem that would cause. But it helped establish him as a really powerful seer of reality. Not only have I seen the past through the interpreters translating the ancient records, you got papyri that gave us the Book of Abraham, etc., visions, Book of Mormon, stuff like that. But it also gave me a chance to really build a future toward the ultimate community of peace, Zion, right? Get ready for the second coming of Jesus, etc. But that actual history is the culprit, at least so far as I can see, as far as I can tell. So, and I mean, I'm quite sure there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with, yeah, I get it. It's all good. This is part of the point of having the discussion, right? And so as we explore our various options, what would be most offensive to Mormons if you say, well, I don't accept it as history, and I don't. Well, that means that Jesus didn't really visit the Americas. Yeah, and so what? As a symbolic, religious, spiritual understanding, Jesus can still be seen as the Christ covering all the earth. His relevance of his teachings, of his atonement, can still be universal. He doesn't have to physically kill off hundreds of thousands of the Nephites and Lamanites first in earthquakes, tornadoes, and huge fires because he thought they were wicked, and then show up and say the same thing that he said in the New Testament, which doesn't do much, for you. But as a religious, as a mythological archetype of the Christ being universal within all women, children, and men, the message of the Book of Mormon, Christ coming to the Americas, I could actually see being quite powerful. Who cares whether it's literal? The Jewish Zohar scholars, they propose that is the absolute weakest level to study Scripture on, is the literal historical. There are much more fulfilling ways in higher orders of understanding than the literal historical. Maybe, who knows, maybe the brethren have finally come around to recognizing that, and they're realizing in this type of day and age, with this kind of technology, maybe they better up their game and quit looking at the lowest importance of level of scripture study and get with it. Bump up, become more spiritual, become more symbolic, ironically, become more mythical in order to enhance the spirituality. Who knows? We don't know. We're going to keep our eye on them. I'm at 2 hours. Again, I really did not expect to make a 6 to 7 part series out of this debate. The glorious part about this is this shows that both sides took it seriously. This is what we've been needing. We need your best foot forward. We need your best foot forward. Let's test this once and for all. Notice and observe sincerely, Jenkins did not defeat the Book of Mormon. That wasn't even his intent. He defeated an interpretation of that book, the literal, historical. But is that the only place where actual value is? I would propose no. Heavens no. That's far too myopic of a view. One of the things that really struck me when I read the Zohar was the truly almost bizarre way that they unhistorically studied the Torah in the Old Testament. And it was absolutely amazing how they wove together so many, on the one side, contradictory, on the other hand, speculative. On the other hand, deeply spiritual and fulfilling, because they were taking parts of the scripture that you never would think of putting together with other parts of another book in the scripture together to produce a meaning that you go, you physically, intellectually, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, you cannot arrive at that level of meaning, historical context to the Zohar Jews now is irrelevant. That has nothing to do with it. Who cares what the ancient author thought? None of that matters. The Spirit is going to allow you to take sometimes just 3 words and then pull together some other completely different sentence that has absolutely no similarity of context whatsoever in any universe, and put those together, and then take that and put that back into the creation account of Genesis, and watch out, your mind opens up, your eyes begin to see a different meaning, and you go, actually, that's utterly fascinating. Could it be, perhaps, that in the first 200 years of childhood and immaturity and trying to get up to puberty, Mormonism has arrived to the point to where they actually can quit being so woodenly boringly, historically literal, and actually begin utilizing the scriptures on a deeper level and plane to actually bring us closer to God. I mean, that would be miraculous. I've got to confess, I personally don't think they'd ever do that. But who knows? I suspect, and I think you can tell by the way the leaders are talking now, that they really are nudging away from the literal historical. In fact, criminy, is it my impression that's wrong? Are they even using the Book of Mormon at all as a historical literal text? I don't know. I mean, the leaders, not the apologists. Those guys, I don't think they'll ever see the light. I don't know. The older generation has to die away before the new, more spiritually mature generation can take over, I would suppose. So, oh, thank you, Tessa Dawn Smith. That's very nice to say. Yeah, well, it is too. And it's really important to see. I'm going to put your comment up. Thank you for sharing this with us, BYP. It's good to hear how apologist arguments are dismantled to reprogram errant thinking. Religion and the church did a number on me. Yeah, me too. I think all of us, Tessa. Really. Thanks for helping me see. My good pleasure. Yeah. And yet, I mean, that's not to say we have clear vision. None of us do, really. Always more to learn. But once you get out of that literal wooden thinking and you begin to compare some of the great literature as well as some of the great mythologies and history and spirituality from other traditions with your book of scripture, rather than just contradicting and threatening your unique status as the one true church, I wonder if perhaps that might actually expand it into a more attractive religion. Nobody tell the Mormons I'm speculating like this. I don't want them to get any ideas. But on an individual basis. So I don't know. Oh, Doug Vincent. Hi, Laura Paris. Yeah, Doug's got a good point. I don't think so, he says. They just spent $192 million to buy Kirtland so they could control the historical narrative. Man, for all the world, that's what it looks like to me. Sharp observation as always, Doug. Yeah. I don't know all the answers. And that's fun. That's what makes this fun. So once again, I'm going to have to break this up, and I will, here we go. I will produce a part 4. I will put all of the links of the previous ones into the description of this one. But yeah, I don't want to go so long that it's hard to enjoy. I am really happy I got through the Nil Rapalai argument and the response, because to me that was a major highlight, because I always use that argument as an apologist. Well, the Book of Mormon doesn't have anything, but neither does the Bible. I didn't recognize it either, that it takes away from it. I'm still not presenting anything positive for the Book of Mormon, but now I'm arguing against the Bible. If it's incomplete, then it's okay if the Book of Mormon's incomplete. Wrong. Number one, the Bible's not incomplete. Number two, talking about a completely different text and context doesn't help your text. You have to present the case for that book historically, if that's what you're going to teach. Yeah, really, I love how Jenkins pointed that out, because I use that argument a lot as an apologist, and now I see the flaw, the problem. So, hey, Jamie Hendrickson. Ethan Pearson, do I believe in the Bible? Well, now I'll tell you what, that has to get real nuanced. You have to describe what do you mean by believe. You have to describe what the Bible is. I'm not trying to be stupidly nuanced or woke or any of that noise. I'm just saying there's some very interesting definitions that one has to come to grips with before you can answer that kind of question. And I promise, thank you, that's a great question. I'm not trying to put you off. I have been looking into some archaeology and history. Now, there's no question in my mind that there is actual historical parts in the Bible. Absolutely. Does that make the whole thing historical? I don't know. Maybe not. But is there a spiritual element to it? Sure. Yeah, I think so. It's really crazy too, because when I attempt to go to the more scholarly end, when I start looking into the Hebrew and the Greek and all that jazz, I actually get more out of it. And, part of me says, is this what it, I ask, is this what it means to be a little more spiritual? It genuinely could be. It's certainly more intellectual, without question. So I don't, after I lost my Mormon faith, I went atheist for a while. And I used to really ridicule those people. I told them when I was an atheist, I did the atheist thing for 5 or 6 years. And I told them, well, then you weren't really an atheist. And, seriously, I get where they're coming from now. Because I did the atheist thing for 5 or 6 years, and it was nothing but a blessing. It was awesome. I have some fantastic books, and I was able to overcome some of the wooden literal stupidity that I had clung to as a Mormon apologist, because that was the context that you studied out of. But I don't know if I'm going to grow in spirituality or not, but there's all types of different ways to approach the Bible. Also, why can't the Mormon Church do that with its own scriptures as well? Well, it hasn't so far, but it might be attempting to without being so obvious. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I don't any longer. When I was atheist, my point was, when I was atheist, I was truly saying, oh yeah, chuck it all. It's all just stories. It's just old, outdated stories that have absolutely no relevance whatsoever. I was coming out of a basis of anger, I suspect. Now that the anger's gone, I think I can calmly look at some things again and say, all right, I'll be honest with you. I do like that part of the Bible. And I'll be honest with you, I absolutely see really good evidence for some parts of it being actually having occurred, historical, without question. I see some of it as spiritual. I see some of it as philosophical, etc. I will tell you one thing that I've been telling myself for the last year, that I'm going to do this. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet, but I'm going to. The Book of Genesis is not a scientific document, nor was it ever meant to be. But the Book of Genesis is also not a history book either. But I do believe I have a concept of the Book of Genesis, thanks to the research of Leonore Leet, as to what it actually is. And it will blow your mind. It's, as I studied the Kabbalah and I studied the archaeology and you study the history and all of that with Genesis, you study the creation. Oh, is it 7 literal days or are they long periods? All of that noise is completely distracting. And Leonore Leet, I think, has found one of the most incredible interpretations with superb connection and context that I have ever seen on the creation. And nobody has it right. And it was when I was studying the Kabbalah that I ran into that. I'm going to do a video on that. I'm not going to give it away, but I'm going to do a video on that, dang it, because it's utterly fascinating. And it was really quite beautiful. And again, it's one of those things that actually helped me step back and step away from the interpretation of a history or as a science or even as a cosmology. Now, that would be, rather than being the primary focus of the creation drama, it would be a secondary focus. There is a more meaningful primary focus with the Genesis account than a cosmology, but that's not eliminated. I think all of that stuff is absolutely fascinating as all get out. Hey, Renee Nolan. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, you guys. I apologize for keeping so long. Hey, Gio Palana, Jane, Wanda Anthony. Bubbly. Okay, I think I've said hi to everybody. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna call it good. Let's see. When's the next time I can? I might. Now, I've been doing the Backyard Professor live on Saturday mornings with my chess. We're going through Artur Yusupov chess course, which is absolutely fantastic. If you're into chess, come on over Saturday morning, 10 a.m. on Mountain Time in the USA. I don't know how I want to do 2 lives on Saturday and then another live on Sunday, but how far did I get? I was on page 63, right? And yeah, I'm on page 97 and I have 149 plus 25 more pages. See, I've got, holy nightmare, I've got 3 more parts, 3 more sessions to do, and each one will be 2 hours. That's how big, and I get it that people hate stuff that does in parts. This is different. This is the real debate. This is the real discussion. This is where the rubber met the road, and the road won. The road's real. The rubber is not. It's a fantastic subject. I don't know when I'm going to do the next part. I'm not going to wait a whole long time, but I think I do have a guest that I'm lining up for next Sunday, and I really do want to have him on the show. I've got 2 other guests that I really need to bring on the show. Maybe I will put off finishing this debate for a couple of weeks. I don't know yet. Let me know in the comments, would you, to the video, because that helps the algorithm. I'm not kidding. I'm not just saying that to say, hey, hit the like button if you would, and write me a comment in the comments to the video. When would the next time be for a good part 4? For you guys. I mean, you might have to be patient. It may be 2 weeks, and I apologize for doing it that way because I don't want us to lose the momentum and the context, and that's probably what will make me decide I'm going to do a Thursday night live, or who knows. I don't know. Anyway, I do love and appreciate all of you. I appreciate all your support financially, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, physically, emotionally. Just being here and having fun together in the chat and talking with me in the comments and all that. And, I really do appreciate the support. It's a lot of fun. This stuff takes a lot of work, but there's so much pleasure to get out of it that I really don't mind. doing all the work, because in a way, the work is play. It's not a burden of work. It's a pleasure of work. Hard to explain, but that's what it is. So anyway, yeah, well, Renee, that's kind of where I'm leaning, all right. Yeah, it's so interesting. Don't drop the balance. We want to hear it. Okay. We are coming to July 4th, so if things are delayed. Oh, that's good observation too. That's good observation. Good point. Oh, absolutely. Bernard O'Reilly. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not done. And I am so not exaggerating just to try to convince you to come back again for part 210, This is like Rocky series, Rocky 5, Rocky 6, Rocky 7. After Rocky 19, you quit watching the stupid stuff. But I am just so not even kidding. There is still some of the best stuff to come in my next set, in my next part. It's just so chock loaded with information. It's just so chock loaded with good stuff. So, I mean, don't despair. It doesn't peter out and go and bore you at the end. Oh no, man, it is all the way through. It's just powerful. I promise. It's that good. So, yeah. Yeah, but wait, there's more. Tessadon. Yeah. Oh, yeah, good point about Dr. Lundwall. Yeah. He helps you understand Genesis isn't historical. And for all that, no joke. Seriously, this particular situation I discovered about Genesis, if it's not actual history, that did not devalue Genesis for me. It enhanced it. I am serious. Just because you lose the cosmological as the main primary meaning, or the historical as the main primary meaning, does not reduce Genesis' significance or importance. I mean that really seriously. It's cool. So Mormonism has gotten us into that mode, and what a crime, mental crime. Don't buy into that noise. So, okay, I will. That's true, Jamie. Yeah, well, there were a few things that Hamblin. Yeah, there was a few things that Hamblin had a few good points about. I think the overall, he did have some, he wasn't bereft of points. And it's not about scoring anyway, but I think overall, the overwhelming preponderance of the lack of evidence for the Book of Mormon is what overwhelmed me the most. And Jenkins so masterfully just staying focused. Truly, just focus on the issue, and all of those epistemological and methodological and historical, all of that extra super fine phenomenal detail about the Greeks, and name 200 of their generals and their years of their lives and when they were married. All of that great, powerful mental knowledge. Don't let that overwhelm you. It's all irrelevant. First establish the Book of Mormon peoples actually are real, and then we can get off into but yeah, exquisitely well seen. I guess that's why I like doing this series in the parts that I'm doing, for that reason too. So oh, nice point. Jamie, don't let me embarrass you. That's a good point. I'll put your comment up here. The Lamanites and Nephites were so few in number to leave no evidence behind, then they weren't the principal ancestors of Native Americans. If that's true, Joseph Smith isn't a prophet. Interesting. Yeah. See, that's why I love having you guys in my audience, man. Go tell other people too, please. Just say, look, Backyard Professor is exploring this debate in a really full level, and he's giving both sides as much credit as they have. I'm not trying to cheat on one side or the other. I have, I want this to be real. I want this to be legit, and so I'm presenting everything. And that's why you guys keep coming back, because that's what I do, and that's what you want, and I'm happy to deliver. The Beard, let's talk chess now. Dude, I have to go on a potty break. Sorry, but let's talk chess Saturday. Would that be okay? I agree, though. Yeah, chess is on the agenda, but not right at the moment, man. Oh, I love you, dude. You're awesome. The Beard. You're right. Chess is important too. I'm with you. So anyway, okay, you guys. I will let y'all know. Just hit the notification button and all that, so that if I do go live, you'll see it and you'll be able to come to it. So thanks, Beard. You're awesome, man. All right. Hey, I'm going to head out, you guys. Appreciate all of you. I will catch up to you soon. You have a good week for the rest of the week. Good point, Jamie. Real quick, from the Beard, you think Magnus is the best? Absolutely. Good gosh, the guy is animal. But I'll tell you what, Nakamura, those guys are they're gods. I mean, they are fantastic. All right, Geoplanet Jane, thank you. Yeah, I'll talk more. I'm going to do more chess games of Magnus Carlsen too. I promise. I've been looking into him. People started talking to me about Yusupov, and he's fabulous too. But yeah, I will try to show more Magnus Carlsen chess games. Absolutely. Oh, hey, Bernardo Wright from Ireland. All right. Now you're the man, Beard. Yeah. We'll get there, brother. You just stick with me. I'm not going to disappoint you. All right. At least not for long. All right, you guys, get out of here. Get out of here. I'll catch up to you, I promise.